these activities that the library sponsors will run the gamut of not only the month of February, but we've already started. We started last October with our film festival. The other units in the college and other divisions are also involved in bringing you informational and educational as well as cultural events throughout this month-long period. Our theme for our art exhibit is Brooklyn Artists, a multimedia view. And as part of this, we are also having a special lecture on the Harlem Renaissance, myth or reality. Before I go any further, I have an announcement to make that the middle of last week, it was confirmed that Dr. Clark will not be able to make it today. And in his place, he graciously contacted and a friend of his and a colleague. Lindsay Patterson. Okay, we were waiting for the children. And you'll hear more from Lindsay Patterson in a few minutes. But right now, I'd like to bring you a message from our chief librarian, Dr. Cezine R. Nicolescu. I regret that I cannot be here tonight to help open our Black History Month activities. I must attend a meeting of the Library Construction and Service Act Policy Advisory Council for the Board of Regents in Albany. I assure you, however, that my heart and spirit are with you now and throughout Black History Month. It is now 20 years since the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it seems to me very serious problems still remain to be addressed. Nevertheless, people of goodwill have not totally wasted their efforts to present the strong voice of minorities in American life. On behalf of the library, I welcome the opportunity to present and listen to the many voices appearing throughout these programs that will address the vital issues forming the themes of these meetings. In his farewell address, UNESCO's Director General, Mr. Mbao, after his distinguished service of 16 years, eloquently reminded us of the following truths. Quote, each move towards the wider world has led me back more forcefully to my source, and each return to myself has allowed me to feel more powerfully the vibrations which lift me to all other men. Unquote. I hope that Black History Month will lead our minds to return to our sources, and then will lead us to the common bonds linking all of humanity. Let me thank the Library and the Humanities Divisions for their concerted effort in this program. And thank you all for joining us in this important event. Dr. Corby will be with us in a few minutes, but he did not want us to delay the program any further. So I would like Dr. Lorenzo Pace to come forward. He's on the faculty here in the art department of the Humanities Division, and he's the curator of today's exhibit. Dr. Pace.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome all you all to the college. If you haven't been here before, it's a good time to come and look at our different facilities, and I hope you get a chance to see our new structure that's being raised about 4 blocks from here. Hopefully in our new building we have a much more extensive gallery, and the show that you have hopefully got a chance to see is some of the artwork that some of the artists have displayed their talents. And I'd like for you to kind of like meet some of them. Some of them are here, so I'd just like them to stand or raise their hand. Art O'Neill is present, one of the artists here. Lydia Douglas, photographer there. Abdul Rahman, very rear, stand. M.L.J. Johnson, rear there. And young lady here?
Deidre Harris.
Eva Harris, right.
Deidre.
Harris? Yeah. Okay. So, just to kind of give you an idea what some of the artists look at, you never get a chance to see them, or see their face. So, to relate to their work and to talk to them about their work, it's always a good experience. As we move on, what our panel is we're dealing with is basically what it was like during the Harlem Renaissance and what was it? Like, for instance, I came out of the period of the 60s. My whole experience were dealing with the whole radical aspect of it was a great period for the artists because it was feeding on all kinds of protests, feeding on all kinds of dialogue about the Vietnam War, about the social upheavals that here in this country. And the Harlem Renaissance were a period where the artists kind of first began to make a statement about being black, about being African American, and saying it very loudly and very proudly. So the 60s were a real reaffirmation of that period. But the Harlem Renaissance started that whole process. Artists began to say, hey, it feels good to be black. It feels good to know where you come from. And the 60s were a real outburst of that whole energy. That's when the artists began to put all kinds of statements in their work about black power, about destruction, about being feeling good about yourself. The hair began to take on significance. The whole issue of black pride really began to come into the forefront. But it really started in the Harlem Renaissance with the first real upheaval for that whole process. And the writers were involved, the poets were involved, the artists were involved. It was a real cultural renaissance. And so our distinguished panel here tonight is going to address some of those issues and begin to talk about some of those experiences, what the artists were trying to say and trying to do in that period. We're sorry to hear Dr. Clark wasn't going to be a part of our panel, but Mr. Lindsay had decided he will come and share with us some of his aspects and an overview of that period from his perspective. Also, Ella Lightfoot, who also is a portrait painter and was born in Evanstonville, Illinois in 1910. So she must have some real good insight of what it was like during that particular period as an artist. Also came to New York in 1931, and the height of the beginning, or the kind of like down period for the Harlem Renaissance. And also worked in the Federal Arts Project. There were a project the government set up during the Renaissance to give artists monies or workspace to do certain kinds of projects for murals and things of that nature. She also exhibited at the Art Students League in 1933 to 1935. Also at the Dillard University Art Fair in 1941, and also a part of the Schomburg Collection in 1945. So Ms. Lightfoot is really one of really distinguished panels who will be talking to us about her experience. Also, Mr. Fack, who is one of our leading writers on the black artists and black experience. He has written a number of books on the black artists, and if you haven't had a chance to see any of his works, you bought one of the books. Hold up. This is just one of his books through black eyes, and the fact that they also do illustrations and also do the whole aspect of talking about the black arts and black experience. So I want to kind of give them a chance to kind of talk about what it was like, what their perspectives were, and during the Harlem Renaissance, and to kind of like give you a chance to do a little question and answer period. So
Then Du Bois added that he didn't give a damn for any art that wasn't propaganda. Du Bois was surely aiming his remarks at the Young Turks, a group of black writers, painters, sculptors, and musicians who were suddenly coming into prominence during the 1920s. These young artists were mainly in their early 20s and well-educated, and for the most part had rejected middle-class materialism and sought something more fulfilling and spiritual. They rejected, too, using their art as an instrument of racial protest and moral appeal to whites, for they were more interested in discovering their African heritage and folk songs, dances, and art that had been spawned by the diaspora of their ancestors. Their main interest was interpreting black culture for their readers and viewers without apology or racial proselytizing. Langston Hughes summed up their credo best when he wrote in the 1926 issue of The Nation magazine that we younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful and ugly too. The tom-toms cries and the tom-tom laughs. If color people are pleased, we are glad. If they're not, their displeasure doesn't matter either. We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and we stand on the mountaintop, free from within ourselves. Hughes' statement became a kind of manifesto for the young artists who had come to Harlem in the 1920s from all over the country and the Caribbean. But why did Harlem become the symbol of this new mood among young black artists, when actually, in the decade preceding the Harlem Renaissance, and during the Harlem Renaissance itself, around 1920 to 1933, there was often as much artistic activity among blacks in places like Providence, Rhode Island, Buffalo, New York, as in the black sections of New York City. But we read very little about activity in other cities, or even how the Renaissance affected the man and woman in the street, because the media, art galleries, and book publishers were headquartered in New York City. And two, no city had a crisis or opportunity magazine, the two most important publications that figured in the Harlem Renaissance. The Crisis was the official publication of the NAACP. Its editor was Du Bois. Opportunity was published by the Urban League and edited by Charles S. Johnson. Though the Crisis had published many of the works of the young writers before Opportunity, it was more politically than culturally oriented. And two, Du Bois had serious misgivings about the works of these young writers, who included Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. For the works of these writers seldom reflected Du Bois' thesis that all art by blacks should be propaganda for gaining the rights of black folk. Also, Du Bois wanted all black art and literature to always portray blacks in the best possible light. Opportunity magazine, however, was more successful in promoting black culture. It published special issues on African art, Caribbean culture, black theater, musicians, and composers. In September 1924, the magazine began to sponsor literary contests and received over 800 submissions, some from every state in the Union. The next year, the contest attracted over 1,200 entries. Earlier that year, Charles Johnson and others from the Urban League had brought white book and magazine publishers together for an informal dinner at which County Cullen, Gwendolyn Bennett, and other young writers read from their poems and stories. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson were also in attendance. Elaine Locke, the brilliant cultural critic and Howard University professor, acted as master of ceremony. At the end of the evening, Locke was asked by the editor of Survey Graphic magazine to act as a guest editor. This special issue of Survey Graphic appeared in March of 1925 and contained much of the material read at their dinner meeting. Later that year, Locke edited a book entitled The New Negro, which included even more material, and the publication of which some critics mark as the beginning of will cite the publication of Jean Toomer's King as a true beginning of the Renaissance in 1923. Others cite Harlem Shadows by Coy McKay in 1922 as the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. But take your pick, 1917 some people say. But here's a facsimile of Survey Graphic, the magazine in March of 1925, in which young black writers were first featured. Anyway, in March of 1925, in the issue of Survey Graphic I just showed you, Alain Locke attempted to explain in an article entitled Entering the New Negro who this new Negro was. The old Negro, Locke said, had become a myth, and he saw in the new Negro a person of renewed self-respect and self-dependence. And because of this new self-respect and self-dependence, the life of a Negro community is bound to enter a new dynamic phase, Locke wrote. He expected new leadership among blacks, and he jubilantly declared that the day of aunties and uncles, the disrespectful names that Southern whites used to give blacks, was over. Locke said, too, that Uncle Tom and Sambo had passed off. In art and letters, Locke found that the Negro was being seriously portrayed and painted instead of caricatured. But from literary historians, we sometimes get the feeling that they believe the new Negro was only those writers and artists who passed through Harlem in the 20s and 30s. But the new Negro was nationwide. He and she were born out of the urban race riots during the summer of 1919, and the racist experience of black servicemen in Europe during World War I, and the general social, economic, political, and migratory changes and upheavals that were occurring in American society. The term, the new Negro, was coined by journalist James Edward McCall, who became blind from typhoid fever, and with the help of his sister, graduated from college, then founded and edited The Emancipator, a weekly newspaper in Alabama. McCall was often held up as an example of this new Negro for overcoming his handicap and becoming self-dependent. In 1923, The Messenger, a radical socialist magazine, co-edited by A. Philip Randolph, declared that a new Negro woman had arrived too. She was, said The Messenger, the product of profound and vital changes in our economic mechanism, brought mainly by the World War and its aftermath. Along the entire gamut of social, economic, and political attitudes, the new Negro woman has effected a revolutionary orientation in politics, business, and labor, in professions, church, and education, in science, art, and literature. The new Negro woman, with her head erect and spirit undaunted, is resolutely marching forward, ever conscious of her historic and noble mission of doing her bit towards the liberation of her people. But no one that I know of has yet explored the deep connection, I believe, that exists between the appearance of the new Negro and the Marcus Garvey movement. I have the feeling that one could not have existed without the other. But whatever connections future historians will uncover, the new Negro of the Harlem Renaissance had a wide-ranging effect. In Paris, African and Caribbean students were in part persuaded by the activities and the rhetoric of the young Harlem writers to put aside their differences and come together in order to combat French racism. Out of this cooperation between these Africans and Caribbean students in Paris came the concept of negritude. In art, during the Harlem Renaissance, broad educational opportunities were rapidly being made available to Negro artists. And after the Harmon Foundation established an award for achievement in art in 1925, there became more and more individual and group shows by black artists. The result was that more and more young talent turned to art as a career. And the artists didn't just reside only in New York either. They were all over. Some most notably in Chicago, where Archibald Motley lived and worked and became the first black to win a Guggenheim Fellowship and the first to have a one-man show in New York. In 1928, his painting, Old Snuff Taker, won the Harmon Foundation Gold Medal Award. It was in 1928, too, that the Harmon Foundation sponsored the first all-black art exhibit in New York City. During the Renaissance, black educational institutions began to strengthen their art programs and employ black artists who have planned and teach in their art departments. In 1930, Howard University established the first art gallery to be staffed and supervised by blacks. Black artists were engaged at Fisk, Talladega, Hampton, and other black colleges to do murals. The most famous muralist to come out of the Harlem Renaissance was, of course, Aaron Douglas, who did the murals that reside in Harlem's County Cullen Library. But historians of the Harlem Renaissance always tend to focus on the most famous artists and writers to have emerged during this period. But the movement had a deeper effect on ordinary men and women than is ever chronicled. For many of the folks it touched, you will never read about, and there were many others who remain just a footnote to history. But Garland Anderson, a man you have probably only vaguely heard about, if at all, was deeply affected by the Harlem Renaissance. Garland's father had been a slave, and his mother was so huge that Anderson had to push her up the hilly streets of San Francisco. But Anderson loved his mother very much, and when she died, he dropped out of the 4th grade to become a hobo. For the next dozen years, Anderson held a succession of jobs, from singing shoeshine boy in Irish bars to dining car waiter. When he was 21, he returned to San Francisco and became the bellhop and switchboard operator for a small residential hotel. But in 1923, when he was nearly 36 years old, he came across James Everett Call's poem, The New Negro, from which we get The New Negro, which goes like this. He scans the world with calm and fearless eyes, conscious of their power long since forgot. At every step, new man-made barriers rise to bar his progress, but he heeds them not. He stands erect, though tempest round him crash, though thunder bursts and billows surge and roll. He laughs and forges on, while lightning flash along the rocky pathway to his goal. Impassive as a sphinx, he stares ahead, perceives new empires rise and old ones fall, while caste-mad nations lust for blood shed. He sees God's fingers writing on the wall. The soul awakening, wise and strong he stands, holding his destiny within his hands. That was the New Negro poem. This poem touched Anderson very deeply, and after attending some inspirational lectures at San Francisco's Metaphysical Library, he began to read voraciously. Within a year, Anderson had formulated a philosophy he called success principle, and whose premise was, that as a man thinketh, so is he, and which he was confident millions of people throughout the world would readily embrace. But it wasn't until he attended his first play, a Broadway road company of the Fool, that he discovered the medium through which he felt he could demonstrate to the world how his philosophy worked. Anderson, however, had never written anything before, but he declared that with his philosophy insight had come a complete knowledge of dramatic technique. It took Anderson 3.5 months to come up with a plot for a play, but only 3 weeks to write it. But whatever its merits, to get it produced on Racist Broadway in 1924 seemed impossible. He eventually sent the play at the suggestion of a friend to Al Jolson, a white, black-faced singer and comedian who was then the most famous entertainer in America. But instead of waiting for a reply from Jolson, Anderson took a leave of absence from his bellhop Square in New York City, where he camped on Jolson's doorstep. "Your play," Jolson told him when they finally met, "is too far ahead of its time. The public," he said, "is not yet ready to accept blacks and whites on the same dramatic stage." But Anderson remained undaunted. He had, after all, landed uninvited and almost penniless in New York City, and through employing his success principle, or his philosophy, was able to persuade Jolson to provide him with a letter of introduction and enough money to remain in New York for 2 months. But 5 months slipped by before Anderson realized that if his play was ever going to be produced, he would have to come up with a bold and imaginative plan. His money had run out, but instead of admitting defeat, he tucked a Bible under one arm and his play under the other and marched into a Broadway bank where he requested a loan for $150 and explained to bank officials that the only collateral he could put up was his absolute belief in himself. He got the loan. His plan to stage a public reading of his play in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria struck most Broadway observers as absurd. It has never been done before, he was repeatedly told. And you won't get more than 10 people to come, warned famous playwright Channing Pollock. Besides, sneered Pollock, nobody will sit for 2 hours and listen to a manuscript being read. Now, Anderson was the first playwright to think of reading the play. No one else had done it before. It was instinct, Anderson said, that made him ignore Pollock's warning. And it was his philosophy that gave him the courage and wherewithal to talk his way past the bodyguards and secretary of New York's governor, and then persuade the governor to attend his play reading as his honored guest. For Anderson knew that with Al Smith's name on the invitation, his reading would attract all the right people. Everyone who was anyone in New York's social, political, and cultural circles, including the mayor and police chief, attended. Anderson sat near the dais, resplendent in a gold and blue bellhop's uniform, while Richard B. Harris, later Lord in Green Pastures, read Anderson's play in his deep, rich baritone. The play, nearly everyone in the glittering crowd of 700 agreed, was a kind of serious drama Broadway needed. But no one stepped forward and offered to produce a bankroll production. And when the collection hat was passed around, Anderson only collected enough money to repay his bank loan. But Anderson wasn't at all discouraged. There was nothing in his philosophy about defeat. He would simply have to come up with another plan, he told himself. Perhaps seek the endorsement of Calvin Coolidge, the President of the United States. In a letter to Coolidge, Anderson outlined his life and philosophy, but the reply he received was less than encouraging. But that didn't stop him from appearing at the White House with a Bible under one arm and his play under the other, and requesting a meeting with Coolidge. The president, he was coolly informed by a White House receptionist, is fully occupied with important matters of state and does not see anyone without an appointment. But White House personnel grossly underestimate Anderson, and he went from office to office and official to official until much to his surprise, he said, he found himself in an office face to face and alone with Coolidge. Firmly grasping his hand, Anderson recalled later, "I told him all about my work and my ambition, and it was due to the president's interest that my play was produced in New York. Actually, it was the publicity engendered from his meeting with Coolidge that brought both the Broadway producer for appearances. Anderson's play about a bellhop who is falsely accused of rape and is able to prove his innocence by employing his philosophy of life. In 1925, appearances became only the second and first full-length play on Broadway by an Afro-American. It was also the first play to feature an interracial cast on Broadway. Though the play lasted on the 23 performances, it played in selected cities across the country for the next 3.5 years and returned to Broadway again in 1929. But Anderson remains only a footnote to this period, yet he typifies for me that group of men and women who were profoundly touched by the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance, and who were indeed the epitome of the new Negro. Meanwhile, the Harlem Renaissance came to an almost abrupt halt with the 1929 stock market crash and the depression that followed. But before the young artists and writers who had resided in Harlem dispersed, some had tried to break with the older black literary establishment by publishing Fire, a magazine devoted exclusively to the younger Negro artists. Though the magazine's founder included such celebrated writers and artists as Wallace Thurman, its editor, Langston Hughes, Gwendolyn Bennett, Zora Neale Hurston, and Aaron Douglas, the old literary establishment didn't like the contents of the magazine at all, called them fallacious. I have wrote a critic for the Baltimore Afro-American, just tossed fire into the fire. For Aaron Douglas, who in spite of himself and the meaningless grotesqueness of his creations, has gained a reputation as an artist, is permitted to spoil 3 perfectly good pages and a cover with his pen and ink. County Cullen has written a beautiful poem in his From a Dark Tower, but tries his best to obscure the thought in his superfluous sentences. Langston Hughes displays his usual ability to say nothing in many words. Fowler had tried to be provocative and daring and burn up a lot of old, dead, conventional Negro white ideas of the past. There was, however, only one issue of the magazine, because before the first issue could be widely distributed, it was literally consumed by fire. And it took the founders quite a while to pay off their credit debt. Nevertheless, they had clearly made their point. They were determined to keep on expressing their dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. Thank you.
That's just the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. And we had just been graced with our president, Dr. Colby. So would you come and give us an introduction and a welcome? Dr. Colby, would you give a hand?
Good evening. I'm a bit of a disadvantage giving greetings after the program has already started, so please bear with me. I just left the barge right off the Brooklyn Bridge, the music barge, I guess it's called. They were honoring Brooklyn fiction writers of the 1980s. One of the honorees was one of our faculty members, Dr. Elizabeth Nunez Harrell, for her book, When Rocks Dance. So I thought it was important for me to be there. She was the only person of color at that celebration of Brooklyn writers. So we had 2 people of color there. Actually, there were more, but not writers. So, and I will not bore you with what happened there. I just hope that my evening here will be a productive one. And thank you for coming to Medgar Evers, those of you who are our students. I'm assuming everyone here is a student. Welcome.
No, Dr. Colby, everybody's not here as students. Our next panelist, the noted writer and scholar, Yvette.
Thank you very much. If you hear me without my using the microphone, I much prefer not to. Do you hear me quite clearly back there? Very good. A number of years ago, I earned what I laughingly call my living as a public speaker. And I used to sketch and talk simultaneously before audiences. So I sort of learned how to work sometimes against the wind, because I remember once in Ethiopia, I spoke to a group of students talking against the wind, and they still heard me. It falls my lot, and happily, to say a few things about some of the people of the Renaissance I happen to know personally, to say things about them that will make them for you human beings rather than just symbols of a period that we hear much about but don't know much about. First, let me tell you the truth about myself. Though I am no spring chicken, I just, well, if I make it another year and a half, I'll be 80 years old. But I was around as a student during the Harlem Renaissance, during the 1920s. I entered high school in 1922, and I finished high school in 1926, and went on away to school after that, away from my native Baltimore. But I remember many things that were a part of the Renaissance and many of the people. I recall distinctly in 1928, as a sophomore student in the College of Fine Arts, of sending a still life painting down to New York to the Harmon Foundation, wishfully thinking that I would be a Harmon Prize winner. Needless to say, I wasn't, and I shouldn't have been. The painting was not that good. I recognize all that now, but at the time I didn't realize it. But I came to know a number of people who were in the Renaissance. I came to know some of them quite well. And I'm going to start off with some of the people in the entertainment field, because it was through a man who was himself an entertainer on the popular vaudeville stages and in some of the nightclubs of New York that I was introduced to New York. I had finished my four-year course at the university and had gone on back down to Baltimore and was hanging around the Afro-American newspaper office, where they permitted me to write a few articles about people in the city of Baltimore, in and around the city, who were engaged in art activities. That is how writing started for me. And while I was doing this, I had, of course, access to the whole plant there in Baltimore, the Afro plant, and I knew the photographer rather well. I rather liked knowing him because he let me carry his cameras and his equipment, and I got a chance to go to all the racetracks around Baltimore. I went to Bowie, Pimlico, you name them, Havre de Grace. I went to all of them with him, and I went to a number of other places that a newspaper photographer would go carrying his equipment. One day he came back. I was exhibiting down at the Afro, some of my student work, and he came back. He said, "I've just left the Royal Theater." He said, "Man, there is a beautiful woman up there, and she's an artist." He said, "I would take you up there to meet her, but you're such a fool, you wouldn't know how to act if you saw her." He said, "But I'll take you nonetheless if you keep quiet." Well, he was, I hope he was kidding with me, but he did take me up there, and I saw this lady. There was a door ajar. One of the dressing room doors was ajar, and she was sitting there, and sure enough, she was sitting before a painting on an easel. And I knocked on the door, and I said to her, "Excuse me, but I'm from the Afro-American," big newspaper man then. From the Afro-American, "I would like to talk with you about your painting." She said, "It is not my painting, it's my husband's painting. He is the artist, and he'll be off the stage in about 5 minutes." And I waited, and this little man came in the room, under cork, the big lips, the whole thing that you would expect to find at that period. Now, our comedians of that particular period, for the most part, worked in the minstrel tradition, and you know what I mean. They were exaggerated Negroes, and they did this in order to earn a living. And this man came in, and his manner was very quiet and very sedate, and he said to me, how nice it is to meet you, and he said, it's a damn shame that a man has to earn his living this way. He said, this is so undignified. He said, but I am interested in painting, and because I'm an amateur painter, I like to paint when I am off the stage, especially when my wife isn't with me. I have something that interests me that I can do besides chasing women. So he said to me he would be very happy to come to see some of my paintings. Well, to make a long story interesting, he and his wife did come down. He had come out of the court and all that. He was a very good-looking little man. A South Carolinian, by the way. His name was James Carl Harrington. He worked under the stage name Hamtree Harrington, just as Pygmy, whose name was Dewey Markham, worked under the name Pygmy. There was a man, another man whose real name I never remember, but he was String Beans and Pork Chop. There were these various comedians with these tricky names, and Eddie Hunter, of course, was one of the deans of them. Well, anyway, he said to me, have you ever been to New York? And I said, I just passed through New York. He said, you will never make it in Baltimore with your talent. You must go to New York. And I said, but I don't know anyone in New York. He said, you know me in New York. He said, when you get ready to come to New York, you let me know. Well, I thought he was just being nice, you know. I let it go. I was very grateful that I had met this man. And then a couple of years, or the following year, he came back to Baltimore, but not at the Royal Theater. He was downtown at the Maryland Theater, and Yvonne, who comes from Baltimore, knows where the Maryland Theater is. And this time he was traveling with a mixed show, a black and white show. And he and Muriel Ron, who was one of our soprano singers, were working together as a comedy team. And he said to me then, he said, you haven't come to New York yet. If you have, I haven't seen you. And I said, no. He said, now, I mean it. You must come to New York. And he gave me his address and telephone number. And then he sent me to the telegraph office with $100 to wire to his wife. I suppose this was the test, you know. I, of course, clutched the $100 because that was like $1 million during the Depression. Brought him back his receipt and so forth. He gave me the telephone number and so forth. A year or so later, I went to New York, and I stayed with them. They lived on 141st Street between 7th and Lenox Avenues at an apartment, I think it was called the Tucson. Many of the apartment houses of that period were named for great black figures. And this, of course, was the work of an entrepreneur, a black entrepreneur named Peyton, who had bought a number of houses and made it possible for our people to inhabit Harlem. Back in the early 1900s, between 1912 and 1919 or 1916, he worked very successfully as an entrepreneur and a real estate person. Okay, I stayed there, and at Hamtree's apartment, I began to meet people. He had people of the theater who would come by. It wasn't at all unusual for Bubbles, John Bubbles, to come by, or Buck and Bubbles. It wasn't unusual for Duke to come by, but I didn't happen to see Duke at that particular time. I met a number of people, and among the artists who came by were people who were not on the vaudeville stage, but were in the legitimate theater, so-called. He introduced me to Augusta Savage, who had a studio on 135th Street opposite the police station. The street was not as devastated then as it is now. Harlem was a rather good-looking community when I first saw it in the early 1930s, and I read that it was nothing then as compared to what it had been during the 1920s. But I was not born there. I didn't get here till the early 30s to live in New York. But at any rate, I met Augusta, and I met Laura Bowman. I met Evelyn Ellis of the Federal Theater. These are people that I came to know. And it was through Hamtree Harrington, this man of the popular theater, that I was introduced to to this community. Now let me just quickly run down some of the other people oh yes, when I came to live in New York, I followed a friend of mine from Baltimore who was interested in being a lyricist, a lyric writer. And Andy Razoff, who wrote the lyrics to Fats Waller's Ain't Misbehaving, and a lot of other songs that became very popular, was the black lyric writer of the time, and a very, very good one. Andy Razoff was a very literate man who had a feeling for good language and good lyrics. After my friend came to New York, I knew where he lived, and when I came a year later, he introduced me to Eubie Blake. Eubie Blake, who lived to be 100 years old and who died just 3 or 4 years ago. Eubie Blake and I became friends largely because I was a friend of Milton's, and largely because I was from Baltimore, and he had come from Baltimore. So he said, I'll take you under my wing. Eubie Blake was, at that time, not doing as well as he had done during the 1920s. During the 1920s, he and Noble Sissel, Flournoy Miller, and the comedian, the little short fellow, Lyles, Aubrey Lyles, they got together a great show called Shuffle Along. And the title notwithstanding, it was the first attempt to present black entertainment in a way that had been done only by white performers. He had a love interest in the play, in the book. He also had comedians, Miller and Lyles were comedians, but he had beautiful women dressed beautifully as showgirls on the stage. Eubie's wife at the time of his death, Marion Tyler, was one of his showgirls. He had showgirls ranging from white to black, and you know that is what our people look like. He had one woman in this show dressed in a white satin gown. She was jet black and beautiful. He had another black woman who was very white, dressed in a black gown, and he had them just promenade across the stage together, and they stopped the show because this was something that had not been done before. White people, who were the people who managed the theater, said this would not sell, but it did sell, and it sold beautifully. The show went to London and was a huge success in London. I just mentioned this because this was a part of the Renaissance, and I knew these people. I happen to know Eubie very well indeed. I knew also, I had met Adlai Hall. I met Adlai Hall right out here in Brooklyn. Adlai Hall was a great musical comedy star and a singer and dancer. Her cousin lived up here on Pacific Street for a number of years, and when she visited, she now lives in London. Adlai Hall, who is well up in her 80s, is still performing in London, and she's still a good-looking woman, all things being equal, you know. And I recall distinctly meeting her, and I recall that, of course, she had the vanity that you expect of people in show business, because she said, make a sketch of me, and I did. When I began to draw rather truthfully around the chin, she said, lighten up on that a little bit for me. But these are some of the people. I had, I met Bojangles, Bricktop, and several. You couldn't help but meet these people when you were close to people in show business. Among the scholars of the group, Du Bois, I met W.B. Du Bois in a very interesting way. His secretary, and I knew her, at the time said to me, Dr. Du Bois wants an artist who can copy some music for him, because he wants it to go in a book, and he wants it ready for the printer for reproduction. And I did copy it, and when I took it down to him, and his office then was in the offices of the not the WL, the NAACP at 14th Street and Fifth Avenue, or 15th Street, Fifth Avenue. That's where they were at the time. And when I went in with this little drawing, he said to his secretary, he said, Irene, ask the young man how much he wants for his drawing. And here, this is depression. I need money. But I said, would you tell Dr. Du Bois that if he has a copy of any one of his books that he would autograph to me, that would be good enough for me. I've always been a fool this way. You know, I've always wanted things like this. And the old man autographed me a copy of The Soul of Black Folk, which is safely tucked away in the archives because I don't want to lose it. That was my experience with Dr. Du Bois. I knew Richard B. Moore. I knew J.A. Rogers, the historian. Mr. Rogers said to me, he said, you know, Fax, he said, I wanted to be a commercial artist. And I came to New York with that in mind. He said, but I was ready for New York, but New York wasn't ready for me. So I had to do other things. This man was a remarkable human being. He researched, wrote, published, and sold his own books. You know, all really, it's just unbelievable. And when Betty, my wife, and I were in Cairo a number of years ago, and we went to the National Museum in Cairo and stopped before the sculptures of the Nubian kings and queens, I said to Betty, J.A. Rogers told us about this many years ago, but we didn't know what he knew. And we fell for the line that was promulgated by his detractors. The line was, J.A. Rogers is the greatest mythologist of the Negro race. But he was no mythologist. This man was a true scholar. I consider myself fortunate to have known him. I could tell you about so many more. Of course, the painters and sculptors I will leave for my colleague here to talk about. But these are just some of the, I knew Blanche Calloway, Cab Calloway's sister, oldest sister. She was a Renaissance person. Cab came at the end of the Renaissance because we were high school classmates. So, and Cab is just a year older than I am. But Blanche was almost 10 years older than we. And she had she was one of the first women of this country that I knew about to lead an orchestra, to be an orchestra leader. And all the musicians at the time I saw her perform were men. This was a Renaissance figure. Okay, I'll stop at this point because there'll be more to say and I don't want to monopolize the floor.
I'm sure you got walking books here up here. It's a rare opportunity to have this kind of knowledge in one room talking about the same issue. So let's get Ella to come up. Can you give her a hand, please?
My misfortune to found such able speakers. And sitting there was sort of ministry nostalgia because I knew so many of the people of whom you spoke. It just brought back an awful lot. And it also reminded me of my circumstances coming But I did talk it over with one relative who had stopped off here in New York. And she said someone else had that same problem with the Grand Central School of Art. It was a friend of Langston Hughes. And I don't quite remember his name now, but there was a lot to do about it in the papers. And I did go to the league. I was very happy because I got a 3-year scholarship there afterwards. But it was an unfortunate time. As I said, it was a depression. And I met other black people. We weren't called black people, they were called colored people and Negroes. I met a great many of the people who have just been mentioned at a salon or salons that various people in Harlem, certain persons used to have. And one of the persons in whom I met so many of these people was Roberta Boston, Hubert now. She used to be the librarian at the 130th History Library. Through her, I met, well, Papa Schomburg, I guess so many people. I can hardly name them, but anyhow, Langston Hughes. And since she organized the James Weldon Johnson Literary Guild in 1920, you can see it was quite an outlet. I met other groups. We worked together. A. Phillips Randolph, Marian Anderson, who later became a very close personal friend of mine, and later Dr. Ralph Bunch, people like that. Now my contact with these people was a little different than it was with these gentlemen. It was more social. And the writers called McCabe. And of course most all of the artists, because we were together in the Harlem Artists Guild. I did not paint as much as I would have liked to have, but I sort of hung in there. And when the situation became a little tense financially, I decided that I had better stop for a while with the business career, which I did, and I think I lost a bit of ground there. But the artists had certain problems that the black artists had with his rough elbow. And it was something to remember. And it's so nice to know that some of those people are still around some places. And to hear Mr. Fast speak up. I wish that I could tell you more and relate to you the humor of the situation. It was very humorous to me. It was, I knew Harlem and knew these people from a different point of view. It was a matter of going into people's homes. The salons were very important then. Where else would we meet? And I still have contact with a lot of these artists that disappeared from New York here. New York is it's a place that I can't leave because of all of these memories that are part of my life, and I've certainly been in New York much longer than I ever was back there in Evanston, Illinois, or Chicago. And the people from that part of the world end up here in New York anyhow. That's where I've met so many of the people that came from points other than New York, like myself. And I would like to say that I'm still out there pitching. I can't give up, and I'd like to. I'm so happy for the artists today as I look at the work that is doing creative ability that is coming to full flower. It's beautiful. And thank you for listening to these few words. I just would like to say more, but I'm sorry for overcome. Thank you.
Yes, I know you have a lot of questions in your head, and a lot of things you want to know. But one thing that I, as a moderator, I know it's very difficult being a practicing artist myself and dealing with trials and tribulations, trying to survive and trying to make a creative statement and keep hold of principles at the same time. But I know it's very difficult in these periods. But one of the most burning things as I listen to Ella talk and to hear, this is a man's world, as we all kind of have to recognize that. And for a woman to deal with the aspects of trying to be creative in the Harlem Renaissance, I know it must have been a tremendous, tremendous battle for a black woman trying to be creative. So Ella, I'd like to know what is it really like for you as a black woman trying to go against all the arts? I guess typically you wasn't supposed to even be trying to make any creative statements visually. So could you just share with us what it was like as a black woman trying to make a creative statement doing it? Come on. Yes. Then, during the Harlem Renaissance, what was it really like for you as an artist trying to make a creative statement during that period? Could you share with us some of your frustrations, some of your? You said you stopped painting for a while.
Yes, I did. It was a long while because actually I had bills to pay. It was a depression. And it was my husband and I
sharing that with us. There's so much wealth here, and I don't know who to start with and how to start. But Mr. Stack, I really want you to expound on the idea of the artists. You had personal contact with them. They're painters, they're sculptors.
Yeah.
Could you expound on some of those?
Yeah. I met Richmond Barthé Augusta Savage. She was very important. She was important not just to me, but to the whole community of Harlem. And she was important to some individual artists who made their mark, largely because of Augusta's intense interest in them. William Artis, the sculptor, was one. Norman Lewis was another. Jacob Lawrence was another. Gwendolyn Knight Lawrence. Because when I first met Gwen, she was not Gwendolyn Lawrence, she was Gwendolyn Knight. And you remember her, Gwendolyn Knight. And she was very close to Augusta Savage. I mentioned those who have since gone on to make something of a name or reputation for themselves. There was another, and I must not be snobbish about this. I refuse to draw the line of demarcation between artists whose work is popular and artists whose work is not so popular but good just the same. In other words, I don't draw the line of distinction between a person who illustrates and a person who paints. If each one is a good craftsman, that's all it counts. You see, Jacob Lawrence is a fine painter, a wonderful painter. But there are also some fine inspiration to many of us was a young man named Elmer Sims Campbell, who came out of St. Louis, Missouri, and who came to New York, worked for a long time doing little cartoons and things, and when Esquire magazine was born in 1933, he was made to order for it. His cartoons appeared in Esquire magazine from the first issue right on until the time of his death. He died in New York, but he was stricken in Zurich, Switzerland, and came home to spend his last days. But Elmer Campbell was the leading cartoonist for Esquire magazine, and I mean he was the leading one. He was the best. He made Esquire what it was, and he, as a magazine carrying fine cartoons.
I'd like to add a point there. Sims Campbell told me one time in his home, he said, I'm not an artist, I'm a cartoonist, and I don't mind anybody knowing it. And he said, whatever I have, I will sell it. I have nothing, and I'm so attached to it, I can't sell it. And if it doesn't bring me, if I can't sell it, it just won't use me. But I sell it. I just know he was quite an artist.
Well, I agree with you.
But he was very modest about it, but he made that statement. And he's a modest person.
His watercolors were just different. He used watercolor cartoons, and watercolor is a difficult medium to control.
Oh, yeah.
He controlled it. He was the best in his business. Believe me.
So let's come bring the chair back over this way. And I'd also like to know who were some of the artists that you really got a sense of that affected you personally in terms of just reading about them or hearing about them. What some of them that either literary or performer or visual person that really caught your fancy during this period of the Renaissance?
Well, someone I knew extremely well, a writer, was like you. I knew you for the last 6 years of his life. In fact, I put the book, as you know, the best short stories by Negro writers, I put that together for you. And I admired him. I admired Richard Wright, whom I had wanted to meet. I was in Paris the last year of his life. And I wanted to meet him, and I have a cousin who lives in Paris. And so he said, in order to meet Wright, you will have to try out for a play called had any experience, you know, as an actor or whatever. So I went and they gave me a copy of the script, and so they had about 20 people in front of me, you know, auditioning. So it got down to me like 2 or 3, you know, and this part before me, it was all in dialect, and I got cold feet, you know, and left, and I'm really sorry. I mean, I kicked myself because
You really walked out.
I really, you know, I wanted me because he died that year. I knew, well, I've known a lot of writers at the end of their lives who were part of the Renaissance or whatever. Someone who, I knew Archibald Motley's brother, Willard Motley. You know the novel, Knock on Any Door, Let No Man Write My Epitaph. Well, when Motley, they had a very strong mother, and she was determined that both of her boys were going to be what they wanted to be. Archibald wanted to be an artist, and Willard wanted to be a writer. And so, Knock on Any Door took him, you know, a number of years to write, and about 11 years to sell. And so they lived in an Italian neighborhood, and Knock on Any Door takes place in an Italian neighborhood. But anyway, when Motley sold the book, I mean, the publisher kept it 2 years before he told me, you know, I accepted it, became a bestseller. Now, Motley said, I do not want to have my photograph on the book, because I don't want the public to know that I'm black. I want to go before the public as an artist, as a writer. So, you know, no race involved. And that's why, of course, the book became a bestseller. They put his photograph on it. You know, it wouldn't have. But anyway, I knew Motley in Mexico because after his first royalty check from Knock on Any Door was $25,000, he told me. And so he bought a Cadillac and put all of his friends in it. And he took the rest of the money, his other friends that had supported him all of these years, because it was, you know, like 15 years this book was before he got published, and he watched windows and all of that, you know, to have spending money. But anyway, he went to Mexico and said that he loved it so much, he went to Cuernavaca, that he stayed. Friends came back, his mother came back, and that he stayed. And I met him. Langston Hughes had given me an address for Willard Motley when I was going to live in Mexico. I was in a village, Greenwich Village coffee house, and this guy I knew had just come back from Mexico, and he said, you can go and live on $25 a month like a king. Fool that I was. I quit my job in advertising, took my last week's salary, and decided I was going to Mexico and live like a king. Well, you know, when I got there, I mean, it was more expensive than New York City and colder, and so the address for Motley was wrong, but we found him, and I was in. And this, I was working in an advertising agency, so one of the people who did the makeup, tape stuff, whatever, had given me the address of a hotel. This is a nice, charming hotel. It turned out to be the most expensive hotel in Mexico. So here I am, you know, with $500 to live for a year like a king, and the hotel was $100 a day. Well, anyway, so I said 2 days of this stuff is enough. But I found Willard Motley. He lived just outside of Mexico City, old road to Cuernavaca, if you know anything. And I said, nice meeting you, Mr. Motley. I gave him a book that Langston Hughes had made. And he said, how long have you been in Mexico? And I said, 2 days. And I said, well, I'm leaving tomorrow. And so I told him, you know, what had happened. He said, listen, don't make a judgment. Come and stay at my house. And until you get settled, I'll help you find an apartment and whatever. It was the worst decision of my life. But that's another story, because everything happened in Mexico. And I'll just tell you just the end of the story. there was one period I lived in Acapulco in a chicken shack, and it was the happiest days of my life. I cried when I had to leave. But anyway, I was getting ready to come back to New York, and this is after I lived in Mexico for a year. And I had left, I had had an apartment in Mexico City, and whatever, and I lived in front of in Acapulco. But anyway, I was getting ready to leave, and I had left clothes and a lot of stuff, books, at Willard Margaret's place. Langston Hughes had advised me not to take many books, but to take more clothes, because he said if you're well dressed, someone will always buy your meal. But anyway, and I should have taken his advice, but I didn't. Anyway, I was, staying for a week to pick up my stuff and get back so I could come back to the States. And I started having these headaches and suddenly these fevers. And then my right side became paralyzed. And if you knew Willard Margaret, he was the quintessential writer, I would say. He would peek in on me and say, if you want any food, it's on the stove, if you wanted, whatever, and close the door and then go in and drink his tequila. Well, his son's wife came up and saw me. By this time, I had lost. I'd been in bed for a week, and I had lost about 50 pounds. And I couldn't walk, but my whole side was paralyzed. And so the son's wife said, this boy is dying. And if he died, in your house, you had it. Because Willard had been living in Mexico for 10 years, and he had never gotten resident papers. There was a scan which you sent $25 every 6 months to a box number at the border. They sent you a tourist card. And so often he was in Mexico illegally. Anyway, I went to, she took me to a private hospital because she said, if you go to a Mexican one, you never leave. And I had gangrene of the appendix. And so then an interracial couple that I knew, and this is the man, if you've seen old Tarzan movies, the man who plays the chief, this was the husband of this white woman he had married. She had threatened, they had had a romance, and she said, if you won't marry, if you don't marry me, I'll break it off. And so she blackmailed him into marrying her. And so he didn't want the problem of living in the States, and he wanted to go to Mexico, and she hated the decision. She wanted to stay in the United States and be a martyr. And he, he didn't want to have any hassle. And he'd never finished high school, but he was a mechanical genius, and he had gotten jobs, as a mechanical engineer, and he was doing quite well. But she felt that he wasn't making enough money, with her. Anyway, I stayed at the house, and they had this little girl who had never spoken to them. And she would sit at the table, she had a bowl of stuff, and she would dump it in the middle of the table. And the mother would say, now I'll let you. Well, anyway, to make I wound up leaving there, and I went back to Margaret's house, and one day we were at a little thing by the roadside, and this car came up, and they said, we are the Mexican secret police, and we want, and I just happened to, at the time have my tourist job with me. So what they did, they said, well, a Mexican-American, a Cuban-American, has been killed and dumped by your house. And so they thought I was Cuban-American, and I don't know how to make that mistake. But anyway, so they went through Willard's house, and on his desk, he had the check to send to the border for his car. He was in the, so they found his bank book, and they took that, and then they put us in the car, and they taken us off to Mexico City to jail. And so they got halfway to, we were on the highway, and they stopped me, suddenly stopped, and they told me they didn't need me, and, let me out right in the middle of the highway. So I would go back to Willard's house and then wait for him. And the Mexican secret police cleaned him out financially, That night, one of the Mexicans who had worked for him had, was out with his car, had run over a judge. And if you lived with Willard, there was something that happened every day. Every day something was happening. And the unfortunate thing about it is that Willard died of, a gangrene of the intestine. He wouldn't go to the doctor. So just,
Archibald Martin is one of our most noted painters, and that's his brother he's talking about, Archibald Martin. Very, very famous. I'm sure that you all want to ask questions. We don't have much time, but we will take a couple of questions if a few questions. Anybody want to have a question of the panelists? Yes.
What happened to Jessie Fawcett Harris? Now, I want to say that when I was in high school, she was teaching French, about 1940. She would come here and teach French. And I often wondered what happened to her after that. That was about a year before the war.
World War.
Nothing more about her.
Well, she worked for Opportunity. At one time, she was a literary editor during the Harlem Renaissance period. And I think she went back to, from what I read, she went back to Philadelphia. She had a brother here called Arthur Fawcett, and he did a lot of, along with Zora Neale Hurston, he collected folklore stuff, and I think he published a book. And he was also executive of her estate, her literary estate. Because when I was doing the book and I needed to get some permissions, I got it from him.
I see, but funny thing, nobody knew her, except for a few others.
Yeah, well, she was...
I think she'd come from, she was living in Europe, living in Paris. She was very well acquainted.
But she published more novels during the Harlem Renaissance than anybody else.
Yeah, and I was amazed that she wasn't as well known. Of course, the people that did know her, enough were elected. The faculty was so elected with Congress. Well, that's a fact, and they knew everybody.
Well, the Covenants really were the only white one point who supported black.
Yeah,
But the thing is that, when it came, when the war started or whatever, and their position was threatened, they abandoned black.
Yeah.
They did the time before there was no threat to them. They were the only whites who really supported black.
I want to say another thing to this gentleman about J. Rogers. Broke the heart and all the autograph part of Sammy Davis was small. Number of years ago. And they invited J. Rogers. Well, everybody went up there and got Sammy's autograph, and we drank a little liquor and whatnot, and of all things, I don't know why they invited him. At that, within a contest of that kind. And when that old man got up to speak, people just got walked out. En masse. The great J. Rogers, I wanted to stand, say, well, I wanted to grab him back. You come back here and listen to something. But we could call him up, Morningside Avenue, and he would encourage you to call him up at his house.
What was it about J.A. Rogers that people didn't know?
They didn't care. They didn't care. We're talking about the Harlem Renaissance in general. The average person in Harlem, I think, what was it, the poet spoke about that, Sterling Brown. He said, average black person in Harlem didn't know anything about the Renaissance. All they knew how to pay the rent.
During the Depression?
Yeah, not rules and rent parties. You didn't know about the Renaissance. Langston Hughes and this and that. But Langston Hughes lived right up the street from me. 127th, they had a brownstone and so on. You know that. You know anything about Langston Hughes. But he walked the streets of Harlem. Later on, in the later years, he had these capital classes, leaders, sports, and so forth. That didn't succeed. They were not well attended. Very few people know or even care. As a matter of fact, when Walter White died, I went to his funeral in St. Martin's Church, and there was an elderly black woman on the street, so she said to all the cars out there. So he said, what's going on? So I'm Walter White's funeral. He said, who he?
Rogers, for example, how many articles have you seen on him or about him, or any black historian for that matter, about black campaigns?
But again, what I want to mention too is true. That period in Harlem, which people talk about, was great. We had maybe, I know you mentioned the Baltimore paper. We read the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, right? About 5 or 6 black newspapers on Saturday day. Weekly papers, but you could get them on. And we read and discussed, but then it was still just a relatively small pool of black people that did it. The average black person in Harlem was unaware of anything intellectual, anything stimulating. And it was always that, it was all, as Dubois said, referred to talent and But the mass has never been portrayed in the monument.
Okay, there's another question back there.
Well, first, my mention of J.A. Rogers, if I recall correctly, did not include anything other than the fact that he had wanted to be a commercial artist, but that they weren't ready to accept him as such, and he went on to do this other thing. But the question was what?
What did you mention about
Haile Selassie. Of Ethiopia.
I'd have to check that. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that with any real authority. I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Well, I can just say that what someone told me that he said he was commissioned, that it really didn't happen, that he really wasn't commissioned. That he went to Ethiopia and he said he was commissioned. This is what I was told by someone who really I don't know whether it's true or not.
And the other question was
Claude McKay.
Claude.
Oh, I met Claude McKay. He was one of the people I met. Claude McKay, had been a policeman in the West Indies before he came to New York. That's an interesting thing. He was, I remember he used to be at the artist studios up on 141st Street, a very genial guy, a person that you could like. But one of the things the fellows used to always say is, be careful what you say around Claude, and be careful that what you're saying is true, because the next thing you know, it'll turn up in a book under your name. So, that I remember. But I found him pleasant enough. I knew Lindsay Patterson told me he knew Langston better than I did, and I knew Langston too. Langston, he was a quite nice man.
Just a little more about Claude McKay, some literary. He was not here for most of the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s. He went first to Russia, where he was lionized, and then he lived in Paris for a time. He met in Paris a strikingly beautiful black woman who fell in love with her. They went to North Africa, and she was in love with this white guy. She was inside, and so there was a lot of conflict there. But his novel, Home to Harlem, which was published in 1928, was the first black novel to ever be on the bestsellers list. Now, Du Bois and all the old guard hated it because, it was about the cabarets, and it was about life in Harlem as it really was. People were living it on Saturday night. And so this is one of the books that Du Bois said he gets thrown into the fire. But anyway, McKay lived, say, for most of the 20s, and he did not live in Harlem, really. He lived downtown, and he was on the Liberator magazine. They published his first poems, and he was also an editor of the Liberator magazine. When he returned from North Africa, it Renaissance was over, and nobody really remembered Kay. And he fell into physical decline. He was on welfare, whatever. And there was a Catholic sister who, I think she was a black Catholic sister, who sort of, took under his wing and went to Chicago, where he was, put in the hospital. He had some kind of disease that bloated him up. Then he taught, and he also converted to Catholicism. He had been an atheist all of his time. You read his work, you'll see. And then, but once he came on an influence of the Catholic Church, he converted, and many of his poems are about, Catholicism and really how it helped take a faith and whatever, or about religion.
Now that poem that you wrote, If We Must Die, now, was that his most noted?
Right. And that was written in 1919 when they had race riots in the urban area. So he wrote that about the race riots in Paris. He had he had published 2 books in the West Indies before 1912, before he came, and they were in dialect or whatever. And then he went to Tuskegee, and he didn't like getting up at 4 in the morning and milking cows and all of that stuff. So he went to Kansas State University and stayed a couple of years. But there was a patron, a white patron in the West Indies, gave him enough money so he wouldn't have to go to school or work. And the thing is that freed him. And then he came to New York. He sent for his childhood sweetheart in Jamaica, married her, opened this restaurant with someone else, and was never there. It failed, and so he ran out of money. Then he started washing dishes, cigar jobs, and whatever he was, railroad whatever. But that was a good thing for his art, because having to go around and having to work, in these circumstances, he understood what America was all about. So that's why he was able to write a poem like, If We Must Die. And that poem is that Churchill used it before, during World War II, before, I think it was Parliament. And many people thought that it was written by Churchill. And remember when the attic arrived, it was on the wall, and they said, I think Time Magazine, didn't know who the wall was. No, he was a fascinating man. But I have a different, Mrs. County Cullen, who I knew very well, said that Claude Kay, had a terrible personality, but it was good to be man. But I was Mrs. County Cullen, so
What kind of man was he? What kind of man was he?
she thought he was very disagreeable.
I just want to say this one thing. A county Cullen was teaching on 139. So I had a cousin that went there, and was supposed to be named Frederick Douglass. You see, so he came under the influence, the county Cullen, which was sort of an overpouring of the Harlem Renaissance in the 30s, So we got to know some of those people even during my time, like Langston Hughes was still in Harlem, county Cullen was teaching there. So we got to know them. I'd like to ask this one.
One more question, and then we're going to close it down. Time has gotten fast.
Yeah, Bright Law, did you know about him, the comedian
By who?
Bright Law, I think his name was?
Bright Lawson.
Law, L-A-W.
Bright Law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Comedian, the black pro comedian. He was in Barterville. He played as the black pro. And Eddie Cantor copied about much of his material.
Well, I'd like for you all to give our panelists a hand.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really think that we have focused quite well on our theme for Black History Month, which is artists as educators, their historical impact on the African experience in the Americas. We are trying to do 2 things. during this year's Black History Month. We're trying to make you aware of how the African American is described in a variety of artistic mediums, such as our artwork here today. Later on, we will be dealing with other authors. We will be dealing with performing artists as well. We also want you to be aware of how social, historical, and cultural conditions under which the artist labors have improved or impeded the development of a positive African American self-image. Throughout the decades, artists of African American descent have played vital roles in providing presentations of matters involving personal and universal themes. These presentations have often served to initiate an ongoing discussion of cultural and social issues. The range of artists that we, as I said before, in our programming this year will deal with the literary, visual, and performing arts. They reflect important
History, I can't. All of I gave him.
Oh, this?
I think that's you've been holding on to that for dear life. I see you made it. You asked me did I like bean pie. Does not mean that if you get on the
Oh, that's the butternut.
Okay, now I don't have, oh yeah, I love that.
You ever tasted it?
Is the bakery still over on Northern Boulevard? Well, that means I gotta take them over. Excuse me, would you care for one?
Oh, you know, no. I showed one like this. I showed they find fluid. It's a symmetry. Excuse me. That's what
I'll go and I'll find them, and I'll let you know.
Who? No, that's what the last time I was here. I didn't have that.
I know you didn't have that.
This is,
I know, and I know that it makes you cry.
I left it on the program. What do you mean? Who are you talking?
I have that on tape. Standing right in front of him. Who you talking about? How you doing, Jerry? Who that?
I told you all to get this stuff earlier.
And she said,
No, I'll add, okay, what I'll do is I'll add it. And I'll say, no, it is not all right No, that's okay, but no, I won't do that. Matter of fact, let me get a picture.
Also want to see what they did for John Clinton right here.
So am I. That's why
You know, it's an honor.
all right. Whatever you want to do. I know, right? I just thought of you. Thank you very much. And I'll see you at dinner as well.
Yeah.
No, I tried.
Yeah, I saw you.
And sometimes you just get tired of these. Okay, thank you for your kind. I will try to remember. You enjoyed mine? Very much.
No, I can't. I'll see you.
Let's go. Let's go Hi, Mommy. Still
Think about it, but I can't think about it.
So he said, well, you
Yeah, and I never got there. I don't
Press that little button there. How about that?
Well,
You play with that, I'll come back.
okay.
Take a picture. My first one. You don't mind, do you?
I don't mind at all. You don't mind.
They have their own way of why they don't take pictures.
I don't know if you want me to look at you or you
Anything you want, you'll be eating.
I'll be eating and looking over there.
How's it going?
Hi, how you doing? Hello. How you doing? All right. All right. The only time we got together, our people, that's why I didn't know. I mean,
Don't leave. Don't leave. That's nice for you.
Frankie Newton.
She's busy eating.
Frankie Newton.
Yes. Thank you. What I was supposed to do, I've already done, I guess.
Yeah.
I've done it.
Lucky Number Club, that was 7-Eleven Popular Grove. Played there.
So,
Then we played Prison. I was with I was with all the teams. But we were part of the teams back then. I said, we were
Are you recording? Audio?
Yeah, and then
So, it's all right. Okay, focus up, focus up.
that was shown where
Did you white balance? That's all automatic. I know. It's all, you don't have to do anything now, but hold it. Oh, it's over here. You just push the auto. Automatic white balance? Automatic white balance. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's got this is yeah, it's a chip. Yes, a chip. It's a chip. That's why it picks up as well as it does without any additional lighting. Yeah. This has got one chip. Only one. One chip. Yeah. Yeah. The ones with two. The ones with, yeah, it is. Yeah. The ones with two in it, just unbelievable. Yeah. I know. Because when I was in school, I got out of school last year, and they were talking about the chips. Oops. Oh, my. And the viability. You know, and chips. Well, that's the thing now. Yeah. It will be from here on in. Yeah, this is chips. Yeah. I mean, you know, the tubes are too expensive anyway, and hard to maintain. You got to keep them. They got to register. Yeah. But they could break. Yep. And you can't shine them for any sunlight. And this thing can shine right in the sun. Right directly. Yeah.
they look at
So where'd you do your course? Center for Media Arts. Oh yeah. How are they? What do you think about them? I took television production. I thought it was good. Okay. I thought it was good. You know, since I get my student loans thing straight now, I'm going to go back and take computer graphics. Okay. Either there or somewhere. Yeah. You know, but I thought it was good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you know, it wasn't brand new to me. Yeah. But it's nothing like when you get in there and you get from A to Z. Television production, they teach you everything. How to produce a show, how to use screenplay, how to write studio work, how to write a little bit. They have a specific course on writing for television. So why didn't you join the young filmmakers, the film audio? They're down on Broadway, 817 Broadway. Yeah? You go there? I'm a member. Oh, yeah? Yeah, it's $35 to become a member, and then you can get all those classes. 10 years, what is it? Stuff like that. Yeah, they have all of that. It's not only that, when you get into video film, they are the cheapest house in town. So you should pay 6 grand. Earlier, that's why I wanted, because I understood they were very expensive. I didn't mean to cut them off. So why do you go to school? Well, it's more. It's more direct. Okay, they got to go through the 15 weeks and do all that, and then right away it's hands-on. The second day we was at class. Papers and cameras. You know, so you start shooting around. Et cetera, et cetera. So it's like hands-on, right?
Lydia.
I just want to mention that.
You into editing? Yeah, we do that. We do documentaries. A friend of mine, Don Kelly. You probably see long dreadlocks, light-skinned brother. I might know. Yeah, you probably see it. Name rings a bell. So we do oral history kind of thing. Okay, I guess this is half age. Yeah, this is half age. Same stuff. I as a school project I had started and just finished. I got all my shots. I was editing. He played that down, but this documentary was playing. Okay. You know, I got checked to how it's all. You did? I've started it. I think I got it maybe about 5 minutes.
Okay.
On my master.
Right.
But it's still more material.
Okay. Now what you might want to do to make it easier, I'm sure they told you about that, is the time coding. Burn in, so you can just go and put it on the computer and get all that. Yeah, it's really, it saves a lot of time. Editing. Now what you do is you double. While you're dubbing them, you just let them burn in time code so you can see it. And that way you can work it on any equipment. You don't have to have a machine whereby everything is coded in. And that way you can just jot the numbers down and then go to a code machine and work it out from there.
Yeah, because I did quite a few interviews with people. We could use back to people who have, had run programs, etc. Like I said, I never finished it. Completed it.
Yeah, editing is timely.
Right.
It's very, really got to put the time in to edit something.
And especially me being a novice, even though I got all my shots and I knew I wanted, and now it's a matter of putting.
Well, have you put your, did you put your assembly sequence down? Did you decide how you're going to, what kind of storyline, or how you're going to shoot it? I mean, how you're going to edit it?
For the most part, in my mind, yeah.
Okay, what you need to do is then go look at it, look at each, you got to look at all the footage. Look at each one.
We've been doing.
Okay.
When I say we, I'm talking about like this particular, like when you're about 5-6 months in the program, they say, listen, you're all ready to work on your material, your stuff, whatever you want to do. I chose crack, so a couple of students in the class were working with me on my particular project. They had theirs, this one was mine. You know how to use character generator?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you do.
Yeah. But when we get to that, though, we usually let an editor, we just sit there and let an editor do that. And we try to find somebody who is really quick and can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I know.
And make it work.
Yeah.
And that's really the critical. Having a good editor, a good technician who knows how to put the stuff down, while you're sitting there looking at it. But the offline editing, what you're doing, that's the most important.
Yeah. Because I have an idea what I want to do. Just like you say, looking through all the material that I shot, the different interviews, and then editing out, editing in.
You can turn it off. You can turn it off. I'm finished. Yeah, but that's okay. I'm finished. I just wanted to get some of these, make sure I got the personalities together. Yeah, okay.